When they say, oh, civilized cities, and in another clip, well-dressed people, and this is not the third world, they really mean white people, don't they?
Now with the Russians marching in, it's changed the calculus entirely. Tens of thousands of people have tried to flee the city. There will be many more. People are hiding out in bomb shelters. But this isn't a place, with all due respect, like Iraq or Afghanistan, that has seen conflict raging for decades. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European, I have to choose those words carefully too, city where you wouldn't expect that or hope that it's going to happen.
Now the unthinkable has happened to them. And this is not a developing third world nation. This is Europe.
As you're talking to us, Matthew, we're playing in the latest pictures of some of the refugees trying to get on trains or trying to get out of Ukraine. And what's compelling is just looking at them, the way they're dressed. These are prosperous, I'm loath to use the expression, these are prosperous middle-class people. These are not obviously refugees trying to get away from areas in the Middle East that are still in a big state of war. These are not people trying to get away from areas in North Africa. They look like any European family that you would live next door to.
These are not refugees from Syria. These are refugees from neighboring Ukraine. I mean, that, quite frankly, is part of it. These are Christians, they're white.
It's very emotional for me because I see European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed, children being killed every day with Putin's missiles.
Treating the Arab population as a whole, the Palestinian population as a whole, as an inferior race. I mean, it doesn't get stronger than this. And yet you want to be careful about your language. You're happy to correctly use the most strong and robust language to describe the crimes against humanity of Vladimir Putin, but you will not use the same strength of language when it comes to describing Israel's treatment of the Palestinians, when it is now being documented and detailed by two of the most respected human rights organisations in the world, and indeed has been alleged by dozens and dozens of non-governmental organisations, and to be honest, anybody who looks honestly at the decades of brutal, inhumane persecution of the Palestinians, successive assaults on Gaza, the annexation of their land and territory, the systematic application of apartheid rules, you don't want to even use the word apartheid. Never mind sanctions. 5 days sanctions against Putin and his thugs, 70 years of oppression by the Palestinians, and it wouldn't be, what was the word you used? It wouldn't be helpful to impose sanctions. Amnesty International are calling for Israel to be referred to the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. Will you support it? They are calling for targeted sanctions against Israeli officials who are perpetuating the system of apartheid, just exactly the same types of sanctions you've just initiated against Vladimir Putin. Will you support it? And I think the answer is clearly you're not going to. And then we ask the question, why? Why? With such strength of feeling, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil and Green TD stood up one after the other, saying it was intolerable, the thuggery and the warmongering and the brutality of Putin. You wouldn't stand for it. Urgent action had to be taken. But we've got to be much more careful with the Palestinians and their treatment. And I haven't even got time to the briefing I organised this week about the people of Yemen and how Saudi Arabia, the most despotic regime in the world, armed to the teeth by the United States, Britain, France and others, killing 337,000 people in Yemen in the last 5 years. 10,000 children. Any action against the United States for arming them? Or Britain, or France, or Saudi itself? No. No action, no sanctions, no outrage. Words of concern. We'll raise it. We'll raise it. We'll call on them to do things. Now you see, if you're going to have moral standards, those standards have to be consistent. Otherwise, they are not standards at all. They are just cynicism. And of course, we all know the reason that the standards are not consistent is because to call out the apartheid state of Israel would be to run foul of the concerns of certain states that are now presenting themselves as defenders of democracy and so on, such as the United States, the UK, Germany and other powers, whose relationship with Israel, supporting it and backing it, means that the European Union's moral credentials are bankrupted and that they are not willing to take the action. And we go along with that. That is not acceptable. So I appeal to you, Minister, I appeal to you to uphold the tradition this country has, going right back to its foundation, to opposing oppression of peoples and standing up against brutal powers that are willing to subjugate people like the Palestinians or any others. Show some moral backbone, show some consistency and support the motion that we have circulated to every TD in this House, which Sinn Féin have now signed, which a number of the left independents, which People Before Profit have signed, calling for the adoption of the recommendations of the Amnesty report and for the sanctions that must follow that they recommend. Will you support those things? Because if you don't, to be honest, all the words of concern, all the raising it, means nothing to the Palestinian people.
Some of the media coverage of the conflict in Ukraine has been kind of off. We have reporters and pundits making some rather awful remarks about the nature of this conflict and these refugees versus, say, conflicts and refugees in the Middle East. First off, Europe has been home to some of the worst wars and worst war crimes in human history. I mean, the Holocaust. So why this surprise that bad things are happening in Europe? And second, when they say, oh, civilized cities, and in another clip, well-dressed people, and this is not the third world, they really mean white people, don't they? The reason they seem to want us to care more about Ukraine, and we should care about Ukraine, but not because they're white Europeans. That shouldn't be the reason we care about Ukraine.
Yeah, no, that's what's so disturbing in all of this. And in fact, not only that, it's trying to make an excuse why the West should get involved and embrace these refugees and help them. Listen, let's be clear. You should encourage and actually help refugees because they are fleeing a war. I don't know if you saw this. There was a op-ed today in the Telegraph. I think we have it. We'll put it up for our viewers to see. This was an op-ed in which the writer, Daniel Hannon, said that these people, the Ukrainians, they're like us. They watch Netflix. They have Instagram accounts. They read uncensored newspaper, and then goes on to say that war is no longer something visited upon impoverished and remote population. Oh no, it's happening to us here in Europe. And to your point, you're absolutely correct. Europe has had some of the worst human rights abuses and atrocities and wars in not just modern history, in all of history.